He is the author of, I believe, 3 editions now of More Guns, Less Crime. This book has been used to counter the anti-gun media now for well over 10 years. He also is the author of his new release called At the Brink. Please help me welcome Dr. John Lott Jr. Well, it's a real honor to be here. I appreciate it. I think the key word here is safety. If the debate's going to be won, it's going to have to be won on whether or not allowing people to defend themselves save lives or not. Too much of this debate right now is based on emotions and what people are seeing in the media. The understandable reaction that people have when they see something bad happens with a gun, whether it be a new town or something else, is to go and take away guns. And it's understandable when you see this in the media. I mean, without trying, people can think of recalling what they think are thousands of stories that they've seen on national media about bad things that happen with guns. Well, when was the last time you saw a story on the national news about somebody using a gun to protect themselves or protect somebody else? You may see a few of those, but it's overwhelmingly lopsided on the one side. If you go and look at the evidence that's there, the Department of Justice, FBI indicates that there's about 300,000 crimes that are committed each year with guns. If you look at the surveys that they do, because not all crimes are reported to the police, obviously, it's about 450,000 crimes that are committed with guns. By contrast, similar surveys indicate that people use guns to protect themselves and stop crimes about 2 million times a year. That's 4 to 5 times more frequently each year that people use guns to stop crime than they use them to commit them. My research tells me that the police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But I think if you go and talk to the police, one thing that they'll make clear is that they understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crime's occurred. And that raises the question, what should potential victims do to be able to protect themselves when the police can't be there? Now, there's lots of research I could go into. I'll just leave you with a couple simple facts. And one is, every place in the world that's banned guns, we've seen murder rates go up, and often by large amounts. Americans are familiar with what's happened in Washington, D.C. and Chicago when guns were banned, but it's just not in the United States. People who support gun bans would go and say, well, it's not really a fair test in D.C. and Chicago because unless you ban guns every place, you can't expect it to work where we do ban it because criminals will get guns from Maryland, Virginia, or from the rest of Illinois. Here's the problem. One is, it's not clear how that explains why murder rates went up. It may explain why they didn't go down a lot. But secondly, you can look around the world. We have island nations which have no neighbor that they can go and blame for having problems with guns, that have banned guns, entire nations that have banned guns, and yet every single time that guns have been banned, murder rates and violent crime rates have gone up. You know, often people will go and point to some other country and say, well, look at the United Kingdom. They have relatively low gun ownership and relatively few murders. There's a simple response when people bring up those types of things. And that is just to point out that before they had their regulations, they had even lower murder rates. Murder rates vary across countries for many different reasons. But the point is that when you disarm law-abiding good citizens, when they're less able to go and defend themselves, criminals have an easier time of committing crimes. You know, we all want to try to keep guns away from criminals. But the problems that you face with many different types of gun laws is who's most likely to obey them. And the problem that you face is that even though the laws may, to some extent, take guns away from criminals, they are much more likely usually to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. Let me give you a couple examples just with the debate that we have right now here in Connecticut and across the nation. One of the rules that you have are all these registration rules that are going to be going into effect. We've tried registration in parts of the United States. They've tried it in other parts of the world. Hawaii's had registration of guns for over 50 years. Canada, other countries have had guns for registration for many decades also. Hawaii, despite having it for over 50 years, could not point to one single crime that's been solved as a result of registration. Canada, which just got rid of its registration for long guns and has had registration of handguns since the 1930s, one of the reasons why it got rid of the registration for long guns is that they could not point to one single crime that had been solved as a result of registration. Why is that the case? Well, in theory, the way registration works, that if a criminal goes and commits a crime, and they leave the gun at the crime scene, then you can go and trace the gun back to the criminal, presuming that they're the ones that it was registered to. It doesn't work out that way. One, crime guns are very rarely left at the scene. When they are left at the scene, it's because the criminal's either been killed or wounded, so you're going to catch them anyway. And secondly, in the few times that they are registered, they're never registered to the person that committed the crime. But here's a problem that you face, and that is something that's not talked about in any of this debate, is that all these laws might have some benefits, but they also have costs. So for example, in Hawaii, in 2000, the police reported in just Honolulu that they took 50,000 hours of police time each year to do the registration. The problem is, that's 50,000 hours worth of police time in just one city. Police do lots of valuable things. Police are extremely important in reducing crime. We're taking them away from valuable things that they can do that we know save lives. We know they can go and arrest people. We know they can deter crime from occurring. But if you take 50,000 hours worth of police time and have them do something that hasn't solved one crime, that's bad. Look, here, Canada, other places, Canada spent billions of dollars on their registration for long guns. They could have gone and hired something like about 40 to 50,000 more police officers each year. That's a lot of crimes that they could have solved for things that we know work, that they weren't able to do because they were wasting money on registration. Look at background checks that we have. Everyone here wants to try to keep criminals from getting guns. There's no debate about that. But the problem is that the current background check system that we have is a mess. You may not realize this, but let me give you an example. The president, for example, has made continually the claim that 2 million dangerous people that have been prevented from buying guns because of background checks. That's simply not true. What he should have said is he should have said there are 2 million initial denials. There's a huge difference between initial denial and dangerous people prevented from having a gun. Let me just give you a simple example. The late Senator Ted Kennedy, 5 times he was on the no-fly list. 5 times he was initially denied being able to go and fly on a plane. He later flew, but I assume the president wouldn't go and count that as 5 times we stopped a terrorist from flying. Here's the problem. When you look, you just can't count all these initial denials as bad people that you stopped from getting a gun. At least 95% of those initial denials were false positives. And we can't tell exactly because the annual reports don't give us all the data that's necessary. But my guess is it's probably over 99% of these initial denials are false positives. Here's the issue that you face. Most of these people, most of these law-abiding citizens who are stopped, it's probably just an inconvenience. They'll live. But when you're talking about 2 million people, you're going to be talking about a small but significant number of people who really need to get a gun quickly for self-defense, who can't wait months to be able to go and obtain a gun. If a woman's being stalked or threatened, she may only have days in order to try to get a weapon for self-defense. Unfortunately, this 2 million number is just part of the problem. There's another 12 million people who are delayed for 3 days to be able to go and get a gun. Now, 3 days is not months, as we have with the 2 million people. But when you're talking about 12 million people, in that case, such a huge number, you're going to run into a small, but again, statistically significant number of individuals who really did need a gun quickly to defend themselves and were stopped from doing so. The debate that we have, and people rushing through legislation within a day or within hours of getting it passed, is there's no discussion of these trade-offs. There's no discussion that despite what might be good intentions on many people's part, that you're denying people the ability to go and defend themselves when they have to depend on only themselves in order to try to accomplish that defense. Now, one of the common features, and I'll just mention this, my own research and that of other independent academics has found that just the 3-day delay alone is associated with a couple percent increase in rapes and a couple percent increase in aggravated assaults against women. I'm not going to go and argue that's a huge effect, but it's the net effect of having just that 3-day delay that's there. For those couple percent, that's a significant delay, and it's something that we need to talk about in terms of these debates. One of the big other things that's been pushed in these laws across the country right now, including Connecticut, is additional taxes and fees, essentially, on people being able to go and obtain a gun. In Maryland, the law that they just passed there is going to cost at least $350 to license and register a gun in the state. Colorado has new taxes. New York, it's going to be an additional $85 to go and transfer guns than it was before. You know, the $35 fee that you have here just adds on top of additional costs that you have in going through a licensed dealer. They're going to charge you something in addition to the state fee that's going to be there. Those things add up. But if there's one thing that my research convinces me of, is that the people who need guns the most are the ones who are most likely victims. And the people who are the most likely victims of violent crime in our country are poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas. To me, putting these taxes on the people who can least afford to pay them is you're denying them, the people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, the ability to go and defend themselves. You know, in Colorado and Maryland and other places, when they've tried putting through these taxes and fees on people being able to go and obtain guns, Republicans have put up some amendments. In one amendment in Colorado they put up, for example, was to cap the fee at $35. Democrats voted that down. Another amendment that they put up was to exempt people below the poverty level from having to pay the tax. Democrats voted in mass against allowing people below the poverty level to be exempt from that tax. How can you justify saying that the people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, you know, Democrats who talk about poor people, the problems that they have generally not paying tax, for some reason we're completely unsympathetic to poor victims being exempt from these taxes. I look at that, and the only thing I could think of that could justify having that type of tax is that they want to reduce gun ownership. And they particularly want to reduce gun ownership among poor people, particularly among poor blacks who are most likely to be victims of these violent crimes. Look, you know, you can look at Massachusetts, for example. Massachusetts had gun registry and licensing that went into effect in 1998. At that time, you had about 1.5 million people registered to own guns in Massachusetts, legally registered to own guns. Today, it's just a little bit over 200,000. In 13 years, the registration and licensing rules that they had in Massachusetts were able to go and reduce gun ownership in Massachusetts by 86%. Now, you may not have been following this closely, but Massachusetts' murder rate relative to states like yours here has changed a lot in those 13 years. In 1998, Massachusetts' murder rate was 30% below the average of its neighbors. Today, Massachusetts' murder rate is 30% above the average murder rate for its neighbors. That change started right when the registration and licensing laws started making it difficult for law-abiding citizens to own the gun. And again, who do you think were the people that were most likely to have their guns taken away? It was poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas. You go and look at New York City. You have a few thousand people who have concealed handgun permits. Who do they allow to have them? It's basically wealthy whites. You go and look at parts of New York City, like Harlem and other places, the number of blacks who are allowed to go through the process to get guns when you have discretion on the part of these Democrats that control the city governments in those places is virtually zero. The people that they claim to care about are the very law-abiding good citizens who they disarm in these cases. Now, I have to talk about the tragedy that was suffered here in Newtown. You know, the federal law that's been talked about, people, you know, it's pretty obvious to most of us that it wouldn't have had any effect on that tragedy. But, you know, one of the things that needs to be talked about is what motivates these killers and where they commit these crimes time after time. I kind of wish the state would release its report on the Newtown thing now before you had voted on these new laws, rather than voting on these laws before they knew everything about this. But there are a few facts that have come out. One is that Adam Lanza apparently had been planning this attack for over 2 years before he engaged in it. Another fact is that this guy apparently put together a massive spreadsheet, something like 4 feet by 7 feet, where he had gone and recorded past mass victim shootings that had occurred. And one of the things he related this to was the amount of media coverage that they got. He apparently proved to himself something that I think is pretty obvious to most people, and that is the attacks where more people are killed or injured get more media attention. One other fact that seems to have come out is that he compared himself to the Norway killer, who holds the record about less than 2 years ago for killing an individual, killing the most people with a gun, killing 69 people and wounding 110 others. One thing that you see, if you read the diaries, if you look at the videotapes, if you look at other things that these killers leave after they go and commit these crimes, is that they wanted to commit suicide, but they wanted to commit suicide in a way that would make it so that people would know that they were here. They want people's attention. And so they choose places to attack where they think they can be more successful in killing more people. Who knows what the investigation will show in terms of more details that are there. But my guess is what happened is he picked the school because he knew people weren't going to be able to defend themselves, and because the emotional reaction of the children being killed. He picked a vulnerable place precisely for its newsworthiness, so that just as he went and looked at those other cases, he realized that if he did that, he would get more media attention. Now, I'm not going and saying we should pass laws to go and ban the media from going and talking about these attacks. But it's still useful for people to keep in the back of their minds what's motivating these people in the crimes that they're committing here. One common feature, not just at Newtown, but in virtually all the other mass shootings that we've had here in the United States, is that time after time, they keep on occurring where guns are banned. I don't know if you know this, but up until the end of '95, people who had concealed handguns in Connecticut would have been allowed to carry them at the school. With just two exceptions, all the multiple victim public shootings in the United States since at least 1950 have taken place where guns are banned. I'll just give you a couple stories to illustrate this. Look at the Colorado shooting this last summer. There were 7 movie theaters showing the premiere of the Batman movie within a 20-minute drive of the killer's apartment. Only one of those movie theaters posted signs banning permanently concealed handguns. The killer didn't go to the movie theater that was closest to his home. He didn't go to the movie theater that was second closest to his home. He didn't go to the movie theater that advertised itself prominently as having the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado. You would think if somebody wanted to go and kill lots of people, go to a premiere night for a movie at the largest auditoriums in the state. Instead, the killer went to the single movie theater that banned victims from being able to go and defend themselves. Look at the mall shooting in Omaha, or in Kansas City, or the mall shooting in Salt Lake City that we've had over the years. You can have 6, 7, 8 enclosed malls in those different cities. In 2 of those cities, only one mall posted gun-free zone signs, and another one, 2, posted it. Where did the killers go? Just as they go time after time, they pick the venue where the victims weren't able to defend themselves. They pick the venue that had posted signs banning people to have guns for protection. You know, we've heard a lot today about freedom. If I have some advice, you have to think about what matters to people in the middle of the debate. You can't go and use rhetoric that primarily appeals to what you might think is important. To the vast majority of people in the middle of this debate, safety is the ultimate keyword that's there. You have a strong argument. In this case, freedom and safety go together. But if somebody goes and says, I don't think people should be able to sell guns because it's my Second Amendment right, you're not going to win the debate. You have to go and use something that fits in here and explain, as I did previously, how some of these rules work against safety in this case. You have to go and explain to them why what may seem like the obvious solution in these cases, like gun registration, how that can actually hurt people's safety by taking police away from the valuable things in time that we know that they can accomplish if we give them the right tools and let them do traditional types of policing policy that we know works. As I say, police are the single most important factor for reducing crime, but police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crime's been committed. There was a massive poll just done by Police One, which has about 400,000 police in the United States as members. They surveyed 16,000 people, and 79% of the police officers that were surveyed said that law-abiding citizens having guns was either extremely or very important in reducing crime. Police, particularly street officers, agree with you on this type of stuff. They agree with you that you are ultimately the first line of defense, even though they know they're important in deterring crime. They know that they're not going to be there to help you. and they know how valuable guns are to themselves, and they're sympathetic. The vast majority of police officers are sympathetic to having you be able to go and defend yourself. But when police can't be there, my research convinces me of two groups of people who benefit the most from having the option to protect themselves. It's people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. The presence of a gun represents a much bigger change in a woman's ability to go and resist an attack from what's virtually always a male attacker than it does for a male victim. Both benefit, but the benefit is much larger for women. And the second group of people, as I've already mentioned, are the people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime. And that overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas. It'd be great if the police were able to protect them all the time, but they're not. And that raises the question of what people should do when they're having to confront criminals by themselves. But when you argue with people, point out it's the most vulnerable people in our society who benefit the most from having the option to be able to go and protect themselves. Thank you very much for your time.